Hi friends, this is Pastor Keith for Trinity Chapel, Charlotte. I want to welcome you today to another edition of Walking Through Westminster as we continue looking at the Westminster Shorter Catechism. I'm out and about today. There's a little bit of noise in downtown Matthews. Sounded like a fire truck going by, but Lord willing, we'll be able to record this video now, no problem. Today we come to question 42 of the Shorter Catechism, and question 42 asks, what is the sum of the 10 Commandments? And the answer given, the sum of the 10 Commandments is to love the Lord our God with all our heart, with all our soul, with all our strength, and with all our mind, and our neighbor as ourselves. So we've been talking about the revealed will of God, we've been talking about the moral law, and last week we saw that the moral law is summarized for us in the 10 Commandments, and this week we ask an even further, deeper question. What's the summary of the moral law is really what's happening here. And the summary of the 10 Commandments, the sum of the 10 Commandments, is taken directly from the words of Jesus in Matthew chapter 22. Jesus was asked what the greatest commandment was, and he said that the greatest commandment was to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. And what's happening is that Jesus is getting at the details, the depth, the real meaning of the 10 Commandments. Sometimes when we think about the 10 Commandments, when we think about God's law, we think of it in contrast to love, as if those two were set in contradiction to one another. And so some people read Jesus' statement about loving the Lord your God and loving your neighbor as yourself, and they imagine that that is sort of in contrast with the 10 Commandments, as if you could live by God's moral law and keep the 10 Commandments, or you could love your neighbor as yourself. But that's not really what's happening, and that's what this question is making clear for us, that the 10 Commandments ultimately are an expression of love, our love for God and our love for our neighbor. You may know that there are what's called the two tables of the law in the 10 Commandments. In the first 4 commandments, you have how we love the Lord our God, and then in the last 6, you have how we love our neighbor as ourself. This is something that's made clear for us, in particular in Romans 13. I'm going to read that for us here, so give me just a second to get my Bible up. But Romans 13, verse 8 says this. Paul says, "Owe no one anything except to love one another, for he who loves one another has fulfilled the law." And then he says, for the commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness, you shall not covet, quoting directly from the 10 Commandments. And he says, if there's any other commandment, all are summed up in this saying, namely, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love is the fulfillment of the law. So for us, and what we need to understand about the 10 Commandments is the 10 Commandments is not sort of an extra thing that we do in addition to loving God and our neighbor, but rather God gives us the 10 Commandments as a blueprint for how we are to do those things. So we love the Lord our God by putting Him first and not putting any other gods before Him. We love Him by not committing idolatry and making images of Him that are not actual and representative of who He really is. We love Him by not taking His name in vain, and we love Him by keeping His Sabbath day holy. We love our neighbor by not committing adultery. We love our neighbor by not murdering, not stealing, not bearing false witness, all those different kinds of things. Those things are not separated from love, but rather those are the tangible ways that we as human beings can express love both to God and to our neighbor. So that is the sum of the 10 Commandments as it's listed there in the Catechism. It's all wrapped up in this idea and this commandment from the Lord Himself that we are to love God with everything we have, and we are to love our neighbor as ourselves. The sum of the commandments is love. And so I hope that that's encouraging to you. I hope that that is helpful to you and maybe clarifying. Certainly I would encourage you to meditate on that and think about how can I love my neighbor and my God this week, even through keeping these 10 Commandments as God has put them before me. Of course, we don't do this perfectly, and so the good news for us is that there is one who loved us enough to keep all these commandments for us perfectly, the Lord Jesus Christ, and He did so out of love for God and for sinners. That's good news for us this week. Thank you all for being with me. This is Pastor Keith. I wish God's richest blessings on you, and Merry Christmas to each one of you.